I had. Mm-hmm.
Welcome all on this hot, little bit muggy Sunday afternoon, but thank you for being here for the next and the final in our series, our health ministry series, having to do with the end things. This one is called Decisions and Documents. Now, I have an app on my phone, this is true, called We Croak.
Oh my gosh.
And it's not about frogs. In the country of Bhutan, which is between China and India, there's a saying that if you contemplate death 5 times a day, it will bring you happiness. So 5 times a day, randomly, my phone beeps and says, remember that you are going to die. So you might think that's a little bit excessive, but in our culture, we do the opposite. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about it. We hide it away. How many times have you even interrupted an elder who said something like, well, when I die or if I die, and you've said, no, we're not even going to talk about that, right? Well, today we're going to talk about it. And I'm so happy to welcome our distinguished speakers, Terry Helton, who is a health ministry nurse and the chair of the
Coalition for Compassionate Care.
Coalition for Compassionate Care. Our own Jennifer Christensen, a social worker who works in palliative care at Community Memorial Hospital, and Marissa Garcia, an attorney who will help us navigate some of the legal aspects of final decisions and documents. So let's breathe. Okay, it takes a little bit of courage to look death in the eye, but that's what we're going to do. And let's just pray God's blessing on this time. Amen. Thank you, God. We know that whether we live or whether we die, we belong to you. Guide our thinking, guide our conversations, and guide our presenters, that we will leave here with information that we need and that we will put it into action. In Jesus' name, amen.
So, good afternoon, everybody. As we get started, I'm hoping that you picked up a folder, and there should be a folder per person, because in that folder there are going to be 2 documents that you definitely want to look at and decide about. There is the 5 wishes, and then there is the one that says the California Advanced Healthcare Directive. And then at the very back of that same side, there is a pulse and information about that. On the opposite side, there is the PowerPoint that we're showing today, so you don't have to take furious notes on just a single piece of paper. You can use this. And mostly today, I need you to understand this is going to be a conversation about that. So 3 of us are going to share that conversation. But behind that PowerPoint is some information that would be vital for you making your decisions and helping your understanding. Especially if we don't get to talk about it all today, it will be on those papers. So just wanted to give you that as a heads up. And I am excited today. Believe it or not, I'm not the initial speaker. Marissa is.
Good afternoon. So the main legal document the legal document that we're going to be talking about today is the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And this is the document that allows you to designate who you want to make your medical decisions for you and what you want those decisions to be. And there's a couple of components, and we'll go through all of them, but those are the key parts of the Advanced Healthcare Directive. And this is something that can be signed by anybody who is over the age of 18 and has capacity to do so. Oftentimes people say, you know what, I don't need to worry about that yet because I'm still young, I'm not sick. The problem with waiting is that sometimes if you wait too long and you have an illness that impacts capacity, such as dementia or Alzheimer's, you might not be able to sign that document. The other problem with that is that you could be in your 20s and get into a car accident. You really never know. The main case that we think about that's most commonly known in the public, the Shivo case from maybe 20 years ago. She was actually in her mid-20s when she first fell into a coma. So it wasn't, the story of an elderly person. She was a young person who didn't have anything written down. So the Advanced Healthcare Directive, as I mentioned, lets you appoint someone to make your medical decisions. It lets you say what those decisions should be. And then it lets you also talk about certain things like organ donation, final disposition of remains, autopsy wishes, comfort measures, that kind of thing. So it can be as broad or as specific as you would like it to be. And there's a number of resources, there's a number of documents or places that you can go to do that. You don't have to go to an attorney, although that's not a bad idea. But it's one part of the estate plan, but there are resources online where you can download the form from various reputable organizations. You can even, in a worst case scenario, you can handwrite your own wishes. As long as you do it in your own handwriting, sign and date it. But there's lots of ways that you can put your wishes to paper.
So you're saying that if Terry Shivo had just written something on paper and it was in her handwriting, all of that publicity and those problems would have been not a problem for the whole nation?
I would hope so, yes, because the problem was that her husband said she wanted something, wish A, and her parents said no, she wanted wish B. And she had nothing written in place. And so although they went to court, the court said, we're not going to get involved. There's no compelling evidence either way, so we're just going to let it play out. And so she was in a coma I think, for
15 years.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. I was thinking of a different one. 15 years. So she just was there. So that's probably not a scenario or situation you want to be in or you want for any of your loved ones.
No, it's very loving to make up an advance directive. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting if we look at this that, and I'm not going to do the first point that life expectancy has increased because now we know it's not, but focus on medical care has changed. So it's changed from when you were a child to now. It's changed from when my son, who's now 42, was born. It's just changed. There's so many treatments available, and our healthcare system wants to treat you, but it's a question of, is this worth the quality of your life to be treated or not, and to weigh that balance. Is it more painful sometimes to be treated, and is it lengthen your life more than a month or two or not? So those are conversations to have with your medical people. But 90% of the population is dying of chronic diseases. And I think we had this statement conversation last time, is this is a conversation to have with your medical care provider. That as you are diagnosed with a chronic disease, it's time to start having conversations with your medical care provider about serious illness and what those decisions you're going to be facing are. So that it's not a one-time conversation, that it's an ongoing conversation. And I want to give this to you that you can tell your medical provider you can bill for this if they spend at least 16 minutes with you with advanced care planning, and that's what this is called. Serious illness conversation, talking about these decisions they can bill for more than once in a year. So more than half of the patients nearing end of life are too sick to make decisions for themselves. Is this true, Jennifer?
It is, and legally, as Marissa mentioned, as a palliative care social worker, I get a lot of people that are with life-threatening illnesses. And you mentioned this is a really important point. We call it advanced care planning because you should do it ahead, because when you're in the hospital, you might be on life support, you might be confused. Very commonly, patients have dementia, and then families approach us, well, we need to do a power of attorney. But legally, someone cannot establish a power of attorney with dementia. So that is why it's so important to do it ahead of time. The hospital is not the ideal time to do it. Yep. You want to do it as early as you can.
Okay. So, and Marissa has talked about the different legal documents, and they are done by state, correct, Marissa?
Yeah. Yes, it is governed by state law.
So what, and this may be not the place to do it, but why is the 5 wishes accepted in more states? You have no idea either, right?
I can't
I
answer
can't answer that
I just
question.
have to tell you what California law.
I
yes.
know, it's interesting. But I will say this, if you have an advance directive and you travel to another state and you have copies of that, they will review that and try to honor it for the most part. So it's a way to tell others what you want. We talked about that. And now we're going to talk about your agent. Why should you fill out the 5 wishes? And I'm going to skip right ahead to this idea of who your agent is. That's the decision maker. If we looked on, and there's 2 copies, and I'm going to pull out this one. This is a new document I've been using, and I want to thank Jennifer for pointing it out because it is very similar to the 5 wishes. It's not, and I will say, I'm going to be honest, it's not as ushy-gushy as the 5 wishes can be. It doesn't talk about massage and oil. So it does, and the 5 wishes actually talks about that. So as we go into it and it says part 1, Marissa's talked about that, I want you to go to the idea of choosing the agent, which I believe is on page 5. And it's very specific about that. The agent is the decision maker, the surrogate decision maker when you're not able to make medical decisions for yourself. And as we've talked about, that can be an 18-year-old, that can be a 90-year-old. It would be dependent on who that is. So choosing an agent does not necessarily have to be your family. I need you to hear that. It doesn't need to be a family member. It can be a friend. It can be somebody it needs to be somebody you trust who is going to understand your values and what you would want done or not want done. And sometimes family's not that choice. The other thing is they need to be willing to do this, and somebody was just telling me they didn't want to be the willing person, right? Is that what you said?
When I was divorced, my first husband was my agent, and then when I got divorced, I asked one of my best friends, and her dad's a cardiologist, he was chief of staff, so I thought, this is perfect, and she thought about it, and she said, no, I am really not comfortable with that, so I actually kept my ex-husband because he'd known me for years, and I knew he would have the willpower to honor my wishes, which I have a certain set of wishes from what I've seen, and it's not what everyone would agree with, but I knew he could, that's the most important thing, that person can understand where you're coming from, and really having that conversation with the person you want to be your agent. And if they really have a differing viewpoint than yourself, that might not be the best person, because end-of-life wishes are so personal, and there are always going to be people in someone's network of friends and family who don't agree. So the agent is someone that you have explicitly discussed this. That the most important thing is having the discussion, honestly.
Oh, yes.
More so than the paperwork, because I have people with the paperwork, but still sometimes people argue over who the agent is or if it's not well understood. Sometimes the Advanced Healthcare Directive does not go that explicitly. It's kind of vague on end of life, so having spoken with the person so that they really know. I think some of the best situations are when we have a sick patient and the family said, oh, Mom said, look at Uncle Bob, he got stuck on the respirator, and that was horrible. Don't ever do that. So the important thing is people will reflect back on that conversation. That is the single most important thing, even though it's a hard conversation, and that's one of the things that we help with, and there's probably other people in the community that can help too. No one really wants to have this conversation.
No. Did you
The
could tell.
thing I would add is that you want to have the conversation with the person that you're selecting, but you also want to have the conversation with people that you're not selecting. And what I mean by that is if you choose, you have 3 kids and you choose one of your kids to be the primary agent, have the conversation with everybody, because often we get son says, well, Mom told me this, and then other son says, well, Mom never said that to me. And that's when we get into a conflict, and really the only way we have to resolve it is going into court. The other thing that I would say is if you don't want your family or your immediate next of kin, like your child or your spouse or your parent, to be the decision maker, then the Advanced Healthcare Directive is even more important. So if you're in a long-term relationship with somebody, 20 years you've been with somebody, living together, but you're not legally married, they are not going to be the one that the hospital normally looks to make those decisions. So if you want somebody else Other than that, what we have are your legal heirs, then you really need to designate that third party, because then they will be left out of the decision making, and they may be the ones that know your wishes the most.
Right.
So that's what
So it sounds like they can write on these documents, Marissa.
Yes, they can handwrite them. They don't have to be, typed up or anything like that. So a lot of these are fill in the blanks, so you can write in a name. You can check off the box, initial by the one that matches your wishes. So it can be an informal process.
Could they actually write, "I don't want so-and-so making decisions for me"?
Yes, in fact, I just did an estate plan the other day where the woman who was doing the documents, she is not close to her biological or her adopted parents. So we had a section where she specifically listed 5 people who she did not want involved in her care decisions at all. So yes,
Yeah.
that is an option.
So in saying that, we talked about willingness, and I want to talk about ability, and I mean emotional ability. I may have told this story, so if I did, please forgive me. I'm going to repeat it. I have a sister who's 9 years older than me, and she babysat me. She taught me to color. She washed my hair. She cared for me like a surrogate mother. And when it came time for making decisions for my mom, who was at home, and the paramedics were there in Albuquerque, and I'm in Camarillo, she called me and said, "I need you to talk to the paramedics," because she was emotionally unable to tell them to stop. Please, my mom does not want this. And so her ability to do that was not there, and I love her desperately. But I do not want her making decisions for me, because I'm not going to want extended CPR like that. And the other side of this is the conversation. That discussion is so important. I've had a lady that has shown up at meetings like this at least twice, and her mom did an advance directive, had it legally signed, but mom never had the conversation with daughter, and daughter had different values than the mom, and the daughter followed the wishes of the mom and had emotional turmoil over that. So when we're talking about having conversations, it's really important that you're on the same page, and that person can honor your values without it being destructive to them, or vice versa.
Can I add another thing about the emotional piece? For families that have done advanced care planning and had the conversation, you'd be amazed how much peace it brings to the family, especially the children, when they're in a wrenching situation and they can reflect back to, this is what mom or dad wanted. I know I am honoring their wishes. It's a gift you can give, even though I know this is so hard. When the people that are left behind know that they're honoring your wishes, it gives them an incredible amount of comfort and peace of mind.
It is a loving thing to do, to complete
really
them.
is.
It really is. Yeah, and as Marissa said, to share all of that information. If you have somebody who's lived on the other coast for 20 years and you haven't had contact, try to get contact so they're on the same page, because it's amazing how people show up at those times and don't understand.
Or update your documents, because when you sign an advanced healthcare directive, it's not set in stone. They are revocable. The most recent in time is going to be the one that governs. So when we do our documents, we normally suggest every 2 years or after a life event, look at them. Are the people that you've selected, are they still alive? Do you still get along with them? Do you want them to make your decisions for you? If not, do a new document. Revoke it, do a new one. You're not stuck with these wishes. A lot of these legal documents are revocable and changeable to go with your different life circumstances. So don't feel like, if I make this decision today, I'm stuck with it for life. You can modify, just like things happen to us in life, you can change it.
They can, yeah. So we're going to move on to wish 2, that's in the 5 wishes, the blue document in your folders. My wish for the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want. And that is talking about accepting life-extending care. And Jennifer brought up the respirator or the ventilator. That would be life-extending care, where they're going to put a tube down your nose or your throat and help you breathe. And I get kind of graphic and say it's usually more than that, because they're going to put a catheter in your bladder or up your, so you can urinate. They're going to put an arterial line if you're on a they're going to put a line up to your heart so they can measure that while you're in ICU on this ventilator. And there's more tubes. So this is a difficult decision, but it's something you need to understand. It's not simple like we often think it is. Quality of life considerations, I already brought that up. What is that you want? And as you looked at this, both documents are going to say what you want most. What's your quality of life? When is it you say, if I can't go out and have a chocolate sundae when I want, even though I'm taking chemo and my life seems to be pretty good, but the moment I can't go have that chocolate sundae, I don't want to take chemo anymore. Those are your decisions, and it sounds minute, but it's those small things in life that matter, and they're part of what makes our life matter. So measuring the quality of life and making your medical decisions is important. And as Marissa said, changing that document, because what you want today may not be the same as you want in 5 years. Just to consider that. And then the place of death is part of that. Where do you want to die? Do you want to die at home, in the hospital, a nursing home, a board and care? And being prepared for that is important. And would this be a good time to speak about that, Pastor? I didn't even think about it till it came up here.
Well, do you want to mean about the funeral plans?
Or we can leave it to the end. Okay. Julie's going to give us a few minutes on that and how important that is. So my wish for how comfortable I want to be, how do you want your symptoms to be controlled? And I'll probably ask Jennifer a little bit about this too, because you're the social worker, but you see it in the hospital. And I know that people are afraid, especially after all of the opioid stuff going on in this country with overdoses and that. But pain control is one aspect, and it's very important to have your pain controlled where you want it to. And if you have made that decision, and this is not the full conversation because this isn't about hospice, this is about future care, right? But having your pain controlled and having it in a document is important to say. Are you willing to put up with some pain in order to have consciousness and share with people? Or do you just want to be out because you have a zero pain threshold? And I know somebody like that basically has a zero pain threshold. And it's not my husband, and it's not me. It's somebody else that most of you wouldn't know. And I'm amazed, she has a zero pain threshold. So those decisions are important. But also there's considering anxiety. There's considering shortness of breath. All of those are in that medical care thinking. And something to discuss, again, with your medical provider as you make these decisions. And then we don't want to forget spiritual care needs. So I guarantee you, and I can feel that right now, that if you have a spiritual care need any time in this path and walk, Julie or Deacon Cecilia will be there. They're there to meet your needs. And that is really important. And it's important to know that in the hospital, if you're there, in our community, they're going to be there to meet your needs. So did I miss anything that you wanted to add to?
Yeah, I would add, one thing we always say to our patients and families as we're meeting is that there's no right or wrong here. It's highly personal. Some people their quality of life is as long as I'm alive enough to see and have my family visit. They don't care if it's different when they're on a ventilator, because when you're on a ventilator, you're sedated. That's an important point. So that would take quality time away. But some people I have patients, they're willing to go off and on the breathing machine. They're willing to have CPR. Dialysis, I should mention, that's also a life-sustaining treatment. And then nutrition, like artificial feeding. But everyone's different. Quality of life, I can't say what it is for you. And so we need to hear from the patients and family. That's why it's so important to indicate it, because we're not all the same. Some people I had one patient, his slogan was all in or all out. This was a rough case back when I was at Simi Valley Hospital. He was a young man, and he had had a heart attack. But he had talked to his family so many times, all in or all out, and they opted to make him a do not resuscitate. It was rough because he was only in his 50s, but they knew, oh, he's not going to go for any of these tubes, or he's athletic, he's active. Very sad, but so for him, and my thoughts are more aligned with his, but I have people, and there's absolutely no judgment that they're fine in a care facility with feeding tubes or tracheostomies. It's such an individual thing. And with professionals, there's no judgment because, we don't have a right to judge what people view as quality of life. It really comes down to that. What's important to you?
And it's funny because when I do a husband and wife estate plan signing, I always laugh because when they're filling out the directive, usually someone looks at their partner to see, well, which one did you pick? And I said, you don't have to cheat, you pick your own, and that's exactly right. The other common question I get when people are selecting is, well, what do most people select? And I never give an answer because I want you to pick what's important to you, not most people. So pick what really matters to you because it's going to be happening to you.
Wow. The first time I filled out an advance directive, I was sitting in Pleasant Valley's waiting room. And there's a whole story behind that. And my husband and I were debating. And he said, well, I'm just going to keep you on the ventilator so that I can come and tell you that I've run the dishwasher 3 times today. And I turned to him and I said, okay, I'll keep you alive and tell you that I've been opening and shutting the garage door about 25 times today. So, and of course, that's not the point, but it was that we were adding humor to this about having, a real conversation. Yeah, and we don't care about those things, but yeah. So I'm going to move on, and I'm going to skip the next slide because we talked about that in depth the last time that Jennifer and I were here. Wish 4 is my wish for how I want people to treat me. Now, this is really part of the conversation, how you want to be treated. And 5 wishes goes into the idea of, do you want a massage and oil? How often do you want to be bathed? And that type of thing. So those are good conversation points. But it's also, how do you want your family to be, and how do you want them to be? So this is a good opportunity, and there are other ways. The Stanford Letter Writing Project has you writing letters to your family about what you feel and what your life means to you and what you want their life to have and succeed. So this is a good opportunity to have family conversations and to write letters. And I think Marissa would probably say writing a letter to your family is important.
I would say writing is important, talking is important. I would say sometimes don't be so specific in your advanced healthcare directive because let's say you want massages and then that's not something your agent can facilitate. You don't want to put your agent in a position of liability where another family member says, well, hey, you didn't follow what mom and dad wrote to a T. So I'm all for putting things in writing, but don't tie the hands of your agent too much. Have those conversations, let them know the wishes, but you can't control every aspect of it. So just be mindful when you're writing your wishes. Big picture, broad points, and then have more detailed conversations or letters, but not necessarily including every single item in your advanced healthcare directive. We might disagree on that part.
No, I get that, but I want to go back. So that's the personal care aspect. Mm-hmm. What if we went backwards and to the medical aspect that the previous one was back here? So making those decisions about specific medical stuff, would that be an okay thing?
That I would say that's fine. Like if you want to be specific and say, I'm okay with a feeding tube because I can still communicate, as long as I can still recognize my family. I'm not okay with a ventilator. Those are substantive medical decisions.
So you can get pretty specific with medical things when you're a nurse. Yvonne could probably go back there and say that's true. My first advanced directive, I was fearful because I worked in the hospital and I see patients come in and they get too much fluid and then their lungs fill up and they have trouble breathing. So I was being very specific about IV fluids. So
Most people who are not medically trained are not that specific. We have a line in our directive that says we want our agent to consider the benefits of the treatment with the burdens of the treatment. So you're not you don't have to have a medical degree to fill one of these out. You can just say, I want my agent to make decisions consistent with my wishes, weighing these benefits and burden analysis. Or you can say something like, I don't want my agent to make these decisions. If I'm at the end of life, I want to die naturally, no artificial care. So you don't have to itemize every single possible medical treatment there is.
Yeah, Marissa, I'd like to add that that's one of the, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have access to a palliative care team, hospice, or anyone, that's such a good point. How would you even know what the options are? I think most of the time families need the consultation of some sort of health care team. So that's a good point. You don't have to worry about, it's good to mention about intubation, CPR, things like that, artificial nutrition, but all the specifics you can lean on the medical team for advice, because most people need that sort of guidance on prognosis. And sometimes, although we want to do things like during COVID, we couldn't, like the things in the 5 wishes we wouldn't be able to honor. We'd do our best, keeping that in mind.
And your agent also doesn't have to have medical training, because they are going to speak to the doctors. They're going to rely on the opinions of your care team. So they don't have to have all the information themselves. They can look to the people that are providing you care to make that decision that would be consistent with your wishes as well.
I think that's important, because it feels like a lot of pressure on a loved one to how are they going to make this decision.
So I am going to go back and push against that just a little bit, because I am that medical person, and I do know that sometimes people will say, I don't want to have a feeding tube, or I do want a feeding tube, but I don't want a feeding tube, and they've had that decision because of different ideas they have. And now we have a nice doctor who comes in, and you've had a stroke, and this is a very severe stroke that you probably are not going to recover your swallowing ability. But that nice doctor is going to say, but Jennifer, we could put a feeding tube in for a week and see how she does and if she's recovering. And doesn't that sound like a good thing to you? So this is part of the conversation with your family that's so important, because we can be swayed by medical people at times when it really is not what that person in the bed wants. So this is going back to the conversation. And it sounds confusing, and it feels a little confusing, but if I had had a car accident and I needed a tube feeding to recover from a surgery, I would be good with that. If I have a massive stroke and I'm not going to be able to speak again and I'm not going to be able to enjoy food, don't you dare come at me with a feeding tube. And that's
what the Advanced Healthcare Directive really deals with, end-of-life moments. It's not the scenario where you're having surgery and they have to put you on a vent during the surgery. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where the doctors say, this is it, and the only way to really keep this person alive is if we intubate or if they get a feeding tube. Those are the circumstances of your end-of-life care. And can I just also add that it's important to remember that your Advanced Healthcare Directive is usually only effective when you are unable to make your own medical decisions. So if you're able to communicate with your doctors, you can say what you want for your wishes. They're only going to look to the document when you are unable to do so or you don't have the capacity to make informed decisions. So if you have a different wish and you can communicate that, that's still your choice to make that wish. You're not bound by the document if you have a different decision in the moment.
So now, Marissa, that brings up another question, because the documents say, when can that decision maker become the decision maker? And there's a box you can check. So what if you've checked, you have Parkinson's, and so sometimes you're able to speak for yourself and write for yourself, and sometimes you're not. And so you decide to mark the box that your decision maker can do decision making right away. You end up in the hospital and there's a disagreement. What happens then?
Well, if the doctors find that you have capacity to make your own decisions, they really need to be looking to you first, even if the Advanced Healthcare Directive gives your agent immediate authority. So you are still the primary decision maker as long as you have that ability to make those informed decisions.
You could tell the physician. I mean, that happens cross-culturally. There are certain cultures where the patient, especially if they're older, does not want to even have all the medical information, and they will tell us, please go to my children. So we're always going to talk to the patient first just to verify. That's in the hospital. Outside the hospital is a different ballgame when you don't have palliative care, maybe.
Yeah,
Agree.
great job. So we're going to come down to making it legal. And when you fill out this document, and I believe that you're going to do this as you have conversations with your loved ones and your friends.
Question?
Hang on, we're going to do huh? Yes. That should be, you're going to have.
You want to do that now?
So for some people, there is discomfort based on religious tradition about cremation. So there have been some Christian traditions that didn't favor cremation as much as they do now. But you should know that the Lutheran Church recognizes and says it's completely up to you what you decide to do. As long as the remains are treated in a respectful way, cremation is a completely appropriate choice along with burial, right? So the idea is, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. You know, that's where our body always ends up. And we believe in the God of resurrection who brings life out of death.
That's great, thank you.
So on the legal side of that, your directive you can specify whether you want cremation, you do not want cremation, you want burial, or you can just let your agent decide. So you can include all of that. You could include, I want to be buried following the rites of a specific religion or not, so you can specify all of those in the document if you'd like to.
Right, and I'm going to get you now, Pastor Julie, so stand back up. So special wishes for funeral planning, and this is this in the hospice world, and I don't know if they call this in the hospital world, but we call this pre-needs. So and how important this is, and this was something my parents did, and at the time of my father's death, it was very helpful to my mother. And then I have to tell you, at the time my mother died 4 months later, it was an amazing gift that they had done this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right, yeah. Well, after the inevitable happens, and it will, not even the Queen of England could avoid it.
I guess she doesn't wee anymore.
Right. Will die. And I will tell you, it is such a gift to those you leave behind if you have done some thinking and some writing about how you want your funeral or memorial service to be. So in your folder, there is a form, and it asks you a question. So this is great for your family, who you'll leave behind. This is also great for you, just now as a person, to be thinking about, what do you want everyone to leave your funeral service thinking? What do you want them? You know, what are some possibilities? Terry, like, what do you want people to be thinking when they leave your service? Just, I know it's off the cuff, but.
That I'm hoping that they will feel that they have been loved and honored, and that they can leave knowing that God is there.
Yeah. In a way, you get to define your legacy. What Bible verses matter most to you? You know, what psalm do you want us to be reading? Are there hymns that you want us to be singing? It is beautiful. Keep a file now. A lot of people do this when they go to other funerals, and they go, oh, I really like that hymn, or I really like that prayer, and they'll put it in a file. when you come to church on Sunday, we have those amazing bulletins with all the music. If you have some favorite songs, you know, cut them out, tear them out, and put it in that file.
Tim had his music chosen years ago, and we should review this because I know that one of them was on Christ the Solid Rock I Stand.
Yeah.
Which is...
So, and there may be some new ones.
And he
out
wanted
that
the
you
funeral in his home at that time.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah. So that's what that form is. And if you would, you know, make a copy of it and bring it to me. I have a locked file cabinet where I keep all of these. And it's like a special present, a special treasure that you leave to your families. When I sit there and I open up the file and I say, look what your dad wanted you to think when you left the service. Look at the Bible verse that meant so much to your mom. They may not have known that. It really is a gift. Yes, if you filled it out and gave it to Pastor John, I've got those forms. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you want to come look at it and see if you want to redo it, or if you think you know that you still want that, that's fine. And to have questions, one of the most meaningful conversations I had with my grandmother was about death, but I had to do it for a class. I'm so glad I did, but I'm wondering if I would have had the courage to do it if I didn't have to do it for a class. You know, I said, Grandma, I have to interview about these things. I'm sorry, some of them are hard. But, are you afraid to die? Was a question that I asked her. And I don't know, I was in my 20s at that time. I thought, everyone's going to be afraid to die. And she said, no, I'm not afraid to die. And she quoted, oh my goodness, what's that guy's name? That actor. Woody Allen. She quoted Woody Allen to me she said, I'm not afraid to die, but I don't want to be there when it happens. Right? So I got to share that at my grandma's funeral.
Oh my gosh.
And I got to ask her, how do you think of your life? And she compared it, to other women of her generation. She said, well, I was no Eleanor Roosevelt, but I raised a good family. I did some really interesting things in my life, and I feel good about it. So if you have a chance to talk to your children and grandchildren or to young people about your life and how you feel about it and how you look towards death, it's a real gift.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
We're going to have time for questions in just...
Just because you were talking about cremation or body burial. Okay. When my nephew passed away, they had both. So they had a funeral with his body because that was very important to the family. And then he was cremated, and he was actually put in 3 different very important places. So there are lots of options. So I just want to mention that.
And it is, as we come back, we'll remember that we started this whole series with the idea of grief and the importance of funerals, and that helps us. It's not for the person who's died for the most part, it's for the people who remain after the person dies. So funerals, memorial services are extremely important for the survivors.
And within the Advanced Healthcare Directive, you can also incorporate your wishes. If you already have a contract or a pre-need agreement with a specific mortuary or cemetery, you can put that in there to follow my directions, as I've already stated with Conejo Valley or wherever you're going. So you don't have to redo the whole thing. You can just reference it within the Advanced Healthcare Directive.
Well, and what we didn't bring up also is the idea of tissue organ donation can be also listed in your Advanced Directive, and what you want to do with that, whether it's going to be, and these 2 documents don't get as specific, but you can write in there, do you want it to be for profit or nonprofit? Do you want it to be just in the United States or international? Do you want it to be for research, education, and you can put specifically what you want. What?
Transplant only or my whole body, that kind of
The
thing.
whole thing.
Is that, that's kind of that question, right?
Yeah, and so while we're here, we've got a couple of cards. If you can write your questions on the cards and pass them, that would be a great idea. And I am wondering, as we need to talk about the legality of the 5 wishes. We've got to talk about what makes it legal and what we do with it before we finish here. And so the first thing we need to remember is that you're going to sign it. I would like you, as you fill out that document, not to sign it right then. You need to sign it in front of a witness. And they are not witnessing what you wrote in that document, they are only witnessing your signature.
Correct. They just need to witness your signature.
Right, and so that two people can be witnesses.
2 witnesses or 1 notary.
Right,
Yes.
so it's not both.
Correct.
And the other thing is, one of those witnesses can be a relative and have some financial ability in your estate, but it's suggested that you avoid that if possible.
We would always recommend that any witness is a disinterested witness, meaning they are not anybody that's going to be receiving a share of your estate or managing any of your finances. So that's why a notary is always a good option, because you're not looking to family members to be that witness. The last thing you want it to be is invalidated because there was a conflict.
And the other thing that invalidates it is if you assign your agent, the decision maker, as a witness, because then the document is also invalid.
Correct. And if you are already in a skilled nursing facility, there are special rules about that. I don't think we're in that scenario here, but just keep that in mind.
The ombudsman must
Be
witness,
one of those witnesses.
because
yes.
what they're doing is protecting the resident, the person who is in that board and care, that assisted living, or skilled nursing facility. So I'm going to tell you a truthful story. You heard me mention I did my advanced directives the first time at Pleasant Valley Hospital, when it was called Pleasant Valley. It's now St. John's Camarillo Hospital. And I was waiting to have a shoulder surgery by Dr. Percival, bless his heart. And I realized that I did not like the idea that I could end up in a vegetative state if something went wrong. And I had been talking to people about advanced directives. I had done all kinds of things and never filled out one myself. And I'll let you figure out why that is, the biggest reason. But I sat there kind of freaked out that I was possibly going to end up in a state where I didn't want to be, in a long extended care with a tube down my throat. So I began to fill out my advanced directive, knew how to do it, called Chaplain Knapp, if you remember him, and said, I need a witness. I'm filling out my advanced directive. And he immediately came to the waiting room where my husband and I were, and lo and behold, the 2 witnesses he got were from the waiting room, because they were just witnessing my signature, and my husband's signature, by the way. So, and guess what? I survived. I didn't die after I signed that document. And I've redone one when I did my trust, and did it separately from my trust, which is, would you?
Yes, absolutely. You don't want to include any medical decisions within your will or your trust.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate topic.
And it's easier for the docs to see it, and it's easier for the people in the hospital to see it, right?
Well, it's if people bring in the whole packet, we can still locate it. But I don't need to see all that other information. It's
And you don't want to see it, right?
not really. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd rather just have the forms.
So after you have your, it's dated, signed, witnessed, or notarized, then any photocopy is just as legal as the original. And where are you going to put this document? Well, first of all, you're going to give the copies to those agents, the decision makers. Marissa talked about the rest of the family. They need photocopies.
Or they need to know that you've done it. You may not want to circulate it right away to everybody, so that maybe you're worried that so-and-so is going to be unhappy that they are not the primary decision maker. But you just need to tell them, look, we've done our directives or our estate plan. We keep it in the drawer, in our top dress drawer, that kind of thing. Don't keep it in a safe deposit box, and don't keep it in a safe deposit box at the bank.
And don't
Bad
keep it in your
ideas.
fire safe.
Yes, if you can't get to it, if your family can't get to it, your doctors can't read it, it's not going to help you.
It needs to be findable by the paramedics even. So, and on the back table, there were some cards there that said, I have an advanced directive. And the 5 wishes puts them on one of the pages. You can carry that in your wallet, and it allows you to list who your decision makers are and their phone numbers. So the other place you can do this, and I was telling them a story, Marissa earlier, a few years ago before COVID, I was having dinner at the Lure with my husband, and we didn't wait to get a table. We sat in the bar area, and those tables were really close together. And I was having a political conversation with Tim, and the guy next to me said, "Can I interject?" And he interjected, and that was fine. It was nothing horrible. And actually, it was kind of positive. I don't remember it, but... And then we start to eat dinner, and he has a guy come up to the table next to him, and this man sitting next to me pulls out his smartphone, shows it to his friend standing at the table, and it's an echocardiogram of his heart. Now, Terry, being Terry, seeing this, goes, "I wonder if he has an advance directive. This is not my business, but. So I ended up asking him. And on his phone, he had a copy of his living will, which is another name for an advance directive. And so you can store your advance directive on your phone, and you can put it on a thumb drive and send it to your family. There are multiple ways to do this. So I encourage you to do this, and to, if you have done it and it's been a few years, that you redo it. Any other comments on this part?
Not on this part.
Okay, so time-wise, it's 5 to 2. I do have within the packet the post.
And this card sort
Oh.
of.
How
I think
can the
it's more
healthcare,
appropriate for the post.
how can the HCD deal with the severity or duration of life-extending care? What?
It says healthcare
Directive. There is
Oh.
a special instructions section
I'm missing the A.
in the document. So, for example, I had a client who said, you can put me on a ventilator for up to 30 days, and if I don't recover, then I want my agent to remove me from or authorize my removal from the ventilator. So you can set time limits. I had another agent who said, or another client who said, it's okay for me to be put on artificial support for enough time for all of my family to come and say their final goodbyes, and then I would like to be removed from the ventilator. So you can put specific conditions and limits on time if that's something that's important to you.
Yeah, it's not black and white. We wish it were, but it's not. So this card is an interesting question, and it's one I've never had. So if you have identified yourself as an organ donor on your driver's license, does that control over a healthcare directive? And my thinking is it's not black and white, because if you are in the hospital and you're not able to speak for yourself, your advance directive would be probably over the driver's license. They make the first, but I'm going to defer to Marissa.
There is a statute on point, and I cannot remember the correct option. I can look it up.
I
and
can
then
give my
email
experience.
It. Yeah, sure. And
well,
then I can.
because it was a hornet's nest. This happened recently at CMH.
Oh, wow.
Because that's why I was hoping you had an answer, because it was just a mess. Because
She's going to look it up right now.
our patient had become an organ donor on the website through the DMV, and so there's an agency called One Legacy that we as hospital have to notify when people die, so they can, if someone's an organ donor, and they were, One Legacy told us this was legally binding, that the patient had listed herself as an organ donor. She was youngish, and she had a sudden stroke, and her family was devastated. They did not want her to be an organ donor, only because to do so, they were going to have to keep her on life support several days to a week. And then One Legacy, we had to get administration for the hospital. So I don't know legally what it was. I just know that One Legacy said that would be legally binding over the family. So that organ donation is something to be carefully thought out. And if you choose that, you need to let your family know, because if you're in a hospital, it gets really complex.
So, and I'm wondering, as Marissa's looking this up, we know that the most recent dated advance directive or post is the one that is the legal document. So if they had an advance directive that was after the date of their choice for the driver's license, I think that would be the binding one, but Marissa will look this up and see. But speaking of that, a 16-year-old gets a driver's license. They ask them about their donation for body or tissue. So it is not unreasonable to be having these conversations early. And if we have the conversations as an ongoing part of our lives, it's more natural than if we do them this is, we're not going to die, but yeah, we really are going to die. And this used to be a part of our life, that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was present when her grandmother died, and she helped care for her. And that's part of what woke her up to the idea was, in the U.S., we were doing something kind of funky. We used to put dying people in the corner of the hospital and not treat them for their pain and their agony, and they lived alone. You didn't know that? Your face is telling me it's very sad that we did this, and it made her aware that we need to begin to talk about this in our country. As much as Julie had said, we don't like to do it, but it is part of life. And we do know that if we didn't have I love your croak, because it is the idea that we're not here eternally that gives us the reason to look for meaning in our life and purpose. Even as, we think of Pakistan and all the floods, how devastating that is, but that gives us purpose to want to help them. For the people that the ladies here sew quilts for, that gives us purpose and gives us meaning. So those are reasons why we think of death in an abstract way without thinking about it, but that's why we serve. And it's so important to understand that. And so having conversations in our personal life about this is just as important as how we want to serve for other people who are dying. So Marissa, any luck?
I will get back to you on that
Okay,
one.
wow, we've got cards coming up here.
I've read it before, but I'll have to get back to you.
And I know we're limited on time, but I do briefly, and I mean briefly, because I could do an hour on the POLST. I do briefly want to bring it up because the POLST, the pink form in your packet, is a medical order. The advanced directives guide physicians and the paramedics in what you want done and don't want done. It is not a medical order. Advanced directive is for somebody 18 years old and over who can make that decision to sign it themselves. A POLST is a medical order that can be signed by a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. And it makes specific decisions about whether you want to have CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or if you want to allow a natural death. Also, we've known it as a DNR, but it's really allowing a natural death. And if your heart is not beating and you're not breathing, you are basically dead. And so CPR is the hope of bringing you back. A POLST is suggested for people who are approaching end of life. So I would say, unless Jennifer has some kind of secret and Marissa has some kind of secret I know, they don't need a POLST. And at this point in my life, I don't need a POLST. So people who have severe chronic disease, such as cancer, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, respiratory conditions, kidney disease, AIDS, HIV, those people need a POLST. It's a medical order that says whether they want CPR or not. And it's not a death document. I can't make this clear enough because there are people who have mental disabilities and that end up in the ER, and people do not have, that work in the ER sometimes are thinking about things in a different way than a parent would be thinking, or a grandparent that's caring for a child who has mental disabilities. And what they'll say is, well, this is your opportunity to let them go. How would you feel if somebody said that to you with a child that had a disability? So a POLST is also a document that says, I want everything done, and here's the medical order.
But actually, the default setting is we do everything. So more common issue I run across in the ER is people have a pulse, but the paramedics, we don't have access to it, so we do everything.
Right.
We resuscitate them, they end up on life support in the ICU, and then the family says, uh-oh, my loved one had this pulse saying do not resuscitate. And so that's a tricky one. That's so important if you do the pulse to have it where the paramedics, especially if someone calls 911 or the doctor or the hospital has it, because in the ER, the default setting is save lives. So what they have to do is a full aggressive intervention. So if you would not want that, it's really important to have the pulse. Like what you were saying, for younger, healthy people, you don't need really a pulse because we're going to want to do everything. But if you're seriously ill, or for myself over a certain age, then I just want to be do not resuscitate. If you want to be do not resuscitate, it's very important to have a pulse and make sure people have access to it instantly should you go into cardiopulmonary arrest.
Right. So, but I bring that up because people have thought of the pulse as a do not resuscitate order, and that's not its main thing. It is a medical document that says your wishes with a physician or nurse practitioner, PA, signature that makes it an order that the paramedics have to follow. Well, and let me continue here, okay? So it also talks about how you want treatment, and this is why I don't want to go into it deeply today because it can be confusing to people. It talks about a choice of full treatment or selective treatment or comfort-focused treatment, and it talks about feeding tubes. And it is signed by either you or your decision maker. So again, that conversation is really important. And you may have signed a post and your decision maker, and now you can't make a decision for yourself, and that decision maker can come along and change the post. So again, those conversations are very important. A post, once it is signed by the medical provider and the decision maker, you or that decision maker, and dated, becomes a legal document. And it too can be photocopied. Photocopies are just as legal. You always own the pink one. And if it should be, it does not belong in the pink one doesn't belong to your doctor. The pink one belongs to you. The photocopy belongs to your doctor, your nurse practitioner, to the hospital, to your family members. And you can also put a copy on your phone. The hope is in the next year that, by the way, California is working on an electronic registry for this, and the hope is in the next year we will see that active in Ventura County. So, but till then, put that post, if you have one, a photocopy of it on your phone, if that's accessible. In your home, it should be placed with your advanced directive, in front of the advanced directive, and a copy of your pills, your medical medications, and a brief history, medical history if possible, in a plastic binder, someplace findable. Not on the back of your front door, because when the paramedics walk in, they're not going to see it.
Is that the same thing as a durable power of attorney?
A durable power of attorney is, she's asking a durable power of attorney. A durable power of attorney is an advanced directive. No.
It is not the same thing.
No.
It is not the same thing. Your advanced healthcare directive, which appoints an agent for you, is not the same thing as your post. So you cannot give your advanced healthcare to a paramedic in your home and say don't perform CPR. They have to do everything. The advanced healthcare directive goes to the hospital, and then the doctors can make that decision. But it's not the same because the advanced healthcare directive is not a medical order by a physician. So that's your key difference.
Yeah. It doesn't help we have so many names for the advanced directive, does it?
Because some people just pick an agent, and that's where you hear that term, the durable power for healthcare. That's if you just pick an agent. What makes it an advanced healthcare directive is that it lists both your agent and your wishes for healthcare. So it combines both of those aspects. So that's why there are different terms. And one real quick thing that I wanted to add when selecting your agent is very important not to select co-agents. One at a time, please. Because especially if you've picked something that says, I want my agent to, like we said, decide based on the burdens and the benefit, and then you've listed your two children together, they will very likely have different opinions as what is the burden and what is the benefit. So where we see litigation and where we see conflict, and I'm sure Jennifer has tons of stories, is when you have two agents together. So please think about selecting one and then another or another as a backup, but not together.
Or a family. Trying to make a decision as a family
No
is crazy,
families.
right, Jennifer?
Some people prefer by consensus, but that's another conversation. I mean, a lot of people with the agents, they try to do, again, like I'm coming from an inpatient hospital where I have the palliative care team. You may not have access to a team such as that in the community. If you were on hospice, you would, and I would strongly suggest if you have access to a team like that to help with, especially the PULSE form, I think it's very confusing if you're a layperson.
Yeah.
It's really good to get help with it.
Yeah, I'm willing to do a one-on-one meeting if you would like that. So, Marissa, you brought something up, the pairs, and we forgot to talk about the idea that you should, if you have one agent, you should have alternate agents, because I give the example that Tim and I travel a lot, and if we have an accident going to Yosemite and he is not able to make decisions for me, who's going to do that? And that would be, at this point, my second decision maker is my son. And then I have an alternate again, would be my daughter. So, and they know this and they understand it, because what have we had with them? A conversation. And we've had more than one conversation. So it's hopefully becoming more. In fact, Tim will tell me now, like there's a commercial or something on TV, he said, I need you to hear this. This is what I do not want. So it is a normal thing. So we're going to start with some questions here. Is there an age that organ donations are not allowed?
No, you'd be surprised. They can get tissue. I mean, anyone that is interested should definitely register and tell your family, so that, because it's, as I say in the hospital, it's sort of traumatic for the family because it extends the hospital stay. But when they know that you want to be an organ donator or you want to be a donor, then it really is a comfort. So once again, if your family knows, then they don't have an age limit. We even call one legacy if someone's had extended cancer. Now, some people are ruled out, but you'd be surprised how many people have something that could be of use.
Right, and even if you're old, possibly they can use your cornea or your skin.
Right.
So it is valuable. Also, think about this. If you're older and you haven't made your funeral plans, this can be part of your funeral plans to go have science life involved. So the universities will take a whole body and use that for study. So you have to plan ahead for that, though. What do you mean by part of your will, advanced care directives, power of attorney for health care? I think
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but when we do an estate plan in the office, it consists of multiple parts. A will is one document, a trust is another, the durable power for financial purposes is a different document, and your advanced healthcare directive is a different document. And they can all play in together because some of it has to do with incapacity during your lifetime. Some of it has to do with decisions and distribution of your estate. Your advanced healthcare agent may make decisions that you're going to live in your home and receive care services in your home, but they have to work with the person that's managing your finances to make sure that there's income and payments that'll cover for those care expenses. So they can be the same person, but they can be different people. And that's where it's important. We talked about the emotional ability. You may have a son or a daughter or a friend who will be excellent at managing the finances for you, but they would be the completely wrong person to make those medical decisions. So you can have different people in different roles, and each of those documents make up a complete estate plan, but they have different purposes.
so. And I think there was some confusion about the names of the forms. So There's in this pink form I put document in your folders. I didn't put power of attorney for health, but that's one of them. California Hospital Association form, the California Medical Association form, the 5 wishes, the living wills and trusts, holographs. Those are all advanced directives, the power of attorney for healthcare, that agent. Those are all the same names. They just gave them different titles.
And they may have different content, but it
Yeah.
generally covers the same things.
And then regarding what is that?
Choices.
Choices,
Catholic
thank you.
Hospital, husband made choices for my husband feeding tube. We had rejected procedure done by doctor. I did not know he did it twice. That's mine. Oh. Can you clarify?
Do we have a microphone? So, wait, hang on a second.
Catholic Hospital? Will a Catholic hospital affect it?
Have
That's
you
a-
taken into consideration when you're dealing with a Catholic hospital
Well, that's
who has
important.
previous decisions about what you're going to have done? We rejected feeding tubes twice. My husband could no longer talk or swallow, but twice feeding tubes were put in. The first
Oh,
time it failed, the second time
Shouldn't be able to
it
do
was
that.
in. And you're dealing with a hospital that just looks the other way, and
That-
they do what they feel is according to their theological
Whoa.
That should be
prerogative.
illegal.
I'm
That
having
shouldn't happen.
issues with that.
That
Maybe
shouldn't
times
be able to
have
happen.
changed,
When was
but you
this?
are dealing with a Catholic hospital here.
Was
in
it a long
Canada.
time ago? Was it many, many years ago, or how
20
recent?
years ago.
Jeez,
So-
I don't think they can.
Okay, I have to speak to that as a nurse because there has to be a consent signed for that to have happened. And that's interesting. Did they think it was an emergency situation that they had to put this feeding tube in? Because if you were the person signing that consent and he wasn't able to, or was he able to? Could he sign for himself at that time? So, and were you the person that?
Oh,
So,
well,
so that's a whole
might have
different thing.
signed. Someone has to give consent. What kind of feeding tube, though? Was he on a breathing machine, and so it went with it?
Your primary care doctor is not taking care of you once you're in the hospital.
Usually
They turn
not.
you over to somebody that's primarily going around room to room
Hospitalist,
daily,
Right.
periodically. So between this person who you've probably never met, or maybe met once when you brought your patient in, decisions are being made without requiring your opinion or your permission, and it's the hospital's. It's their prerogative, according to their.
No, it's not.
No,
So
it's
I would talk to somebody over there and find out, because I know other people who've run into the same thing at Pleasant Valley Hospital. It's not as simple as you think.
And this
Well,
is-
it's not simple, but the Advanced Healthcare Directive is a legal document. So if your hospital is not following it, then you should probably consult with an attorney, because you can go into court and get a court order to enforce it. And there are remedies that California law provides. So if you find yourself in that situation, your agent really should take steps to enforce your wishes. I don't disagree with you at all. It's a very emotional time, but if you are really in that situation and you want to enforce those wishes, there are remedies available.
Right. And if he was the one that signed the consent, then they had a legal standing. Now, I'm going to say, sometimes that nurse who goes in there is not explaining everything and just wants the consent, and that is improper. They should be explaining what this is about. The other thing is, this is why when somebody's admitted to a hospital and they ask you about an advance directive, do you have this document? Then bring the copy in. If you've already given a copy to one of the hospitals that you know you could be at, and it's been updated, take them the updated form. There is no guarantee they'll see it, but at least they can look in their files to begin with. I am so sorry you went through that.
Yeah, that's we want to prevent things like that. I mean, palliative care is a new field, so I agree with Terry that oftentimes when patients and families are asked for consent, it's not explained, and so usually if a doctor recommends something, you'll agree. So that's what makes it tricky. Like you're saying, it's an emotional time. A doctor says, if we don't do this, your loved one's going to die or you will die, then, processing it goes out the window and you'll probably agree.
So, well, and this is part of the reason the laws have been pushed, that the person who's doing the procedure should be the one explaining it.
Doesn't always happen that way.
It's not
though.
happening that way. So, wow. Any other questions?
Agent should not be somebody who can just say, yes, Randy wanted to die, but also should be somebody who's an advocate for you.
Yes.
Because it's more than just signing that document, honoring my wish.
I would agree. You want someone that knows you, that knows what your wishes are, and is going to be able to advocate. That's why you want someone who, that emotional ability, again, is going to be very important.
That knows your values. And whether those values are you want everything done until even a machine's not going to keep you alive, or if it's the opposite. So your values are important in that conversation. And there are ways to, and both of these documents help you have that, but there's minutia that only your family and friends are going to know. Anything else? You guys have been great. And this is...
Oh, quick question.
It was mentioned about if once you've done your advance directive, you could just put it in the drawer, have your family, thank you, know where that is. We ran into this with my parents, of course, who were elderly. They're gone now. My father had a massive heart attack. We had been told where their documents were. They were supposed to have a will and an advance directive. We'd been over it many times. They only told us that it was in the drawer. The will was in the drawer. They had never done an advance directive. So my feeling was that, and another experience we've also had, it's really nice to see so that you know what's there. And we could have said, oh, this doesn't have an advance directive, to my parents who thought that they had that. So, not everybody, hopefully nowadays, is more aware, but our experience has been with that in another case that things were not what they seemed from what we were told. So the more we can do, the better it might be.
And you are exactly right, because not being able to know where that document is, when Tim and I did our last ones, we actually used the 5 wishes to have the conversation, and then we used the California Hospital Association one and filled out and had it notarized when we did our trust. So unbeknownst to me, Tim put them together, stapled them together, and sent them, well, I knew he was sending them to our kids. He sent them electronically, but I didn't know he sent both. And so when we followed up with our children in the conversation, did you get them? And our son said, yes, I know that Dad does not want to have massages in hot oil, and you would. Which is the 5 wishes. But my son had also told me one time, if I needed to have you as a decision maker, how do you feel about this? And, well, Mom, if you spell it out, I will do it. And I know my son, because this is not going to be emotionally difficult, right? So that conversation is important. Now, switch to my sister. My mother's death will be, the 22nd will be 18 years, the 22nd of this month, and being in Albuquerque. And it's important to share your financial ideas too, and who is on your will, because somebody ended up being very surprised that it wasn't him, which was my brother-in-law, which is what the story had said. And he actually demanded to see the document because he had been told he was the executor, and he was not. It was my sister with the emotional stuff.
Well, that's why, although we're talking about advanced care directives today, I cannot advocate strongly enough to have a complete estate plan.
Yeah.
Because having someone make medical decisions when you don't have anybody to make the financial decisions, and pay your bills while you're in the hospital, or your caregivers, or all of that. It's all part of it, and it's all connected. So if you are doing the directive in the packet, that's great, at least you have one, but you should seriously consider working on an overall estate plan so that all of your needs, medical and financial, are met.
And I heard you say recently that people don't do that because they think it costs a lot of money.
Yes.
I thought it did, several thousand, doesn't it?
It may, depending on who you're working with and what you have, but I can guarantee you that the cost of an estate plan is going to be pennies compared to having to go in and appoint a conservator to make those financial and medical decisions for you, or to go in and have your estate probated, which will then be tens and thousands of dollars in attorney fees and executor fees. So please compare that. And the emotional part of it, that you don't have to go into court at this moment and have someone appointed to make medical decisions while you're incapacitated, there is a value in that that you can't put a price on.
Yeah.
But there are definitely ways that you can get an estate plan for a reasonable price.
Right. And Tim and I have done that.
I would be happy to discuss further.
Of course. So you showed a trust. And I'm going to go back to what Marissa said earlier. We talked about this. My hope is, and that trust is great, and even if you made your decision makers for your medical decisions in that trust, I would encourage you to revisit that and have the advance directive outside of the trust. They are, okay. So because if I have an advance directive and it's in the trust, and I go into an emergency room with somebody, that doctor has to look through all those papers to find who the decision maker is. So when we have just an advance directive separate, they can see very quickly who that is.
Take the master palette, make copies with the signature, put the master palette in, and give it to the hospital that's needed.
It usually is a separate document.
Okay.
I haven't seen incorporating medical within your trust. It's a separate document.
At least a
that's
separate pages.
Yes,
Like you're
absolutely.
saying, they
It's
just
separate.
give us the few pages.
It's
Right.
completely separate.
Okay. So,
Yes. So do you recommend for, if you have a trust and you might change the successor trustees some point in time, do you recommend that you tell everybody involved that you made that change?
I don't.
Okay.
Because you might make that change again, and you don't want to circulate necessarily drafts of your estate plan when it's not finalized. After you pass away, your heirs and those that are mentioned they're required to get a complete copy of it. So at that time, they will find out who's in charge. But I think it can cause conflict during your lifetime that you can probably avoid.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
oh, well, we didn't mean to go here,
No,
but
this is the legal stuff. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. I had heard that there is some place publicly for you to file your will and trust. Is that true? Or like, what if they can't find it? Is there
That
someplace
is
to
not
go?
true.
That's not true.
Your trust is a private document between you and your attorney and those that you share it with. You do not record it anywhere. The times where people can find out that you have one is presumably you have transferred title to your real property in your name as trustee of your trust. So if they run title, it'll say Jane and John Doe, trustees of the Doe Family Trust, are those that are on title. So that will trigger the fact that you have a trust. And there might be the attorney name on the top portion, so then you can investigate. But there's no place like that. After you pass away, you are supposed to lodge your will with the court, but nothing during your lifetime.
So they could easily get misplaced.
They could, but that's why your excellent estate planning attorney is going to have a copy in their file for you. Shameless plug.
No, that's important.
I'm not an attorney.
But those are important questions. So at a later date, that is something that I think it would be, because there was so much valuable information I heard Marissa talk about to the Coalition for Compassionate Care, who she is a member of. And this is shameless advertising, but Jennifer also works for Community Memorial Hospital, and they are members of the Coalition for Compassionate Care too. So that is it's not even a nonprofit. We come under the Ventura County Medical Association in promoting healthcare conversation, education about end-of-life planning and serious illness conversations. So that's how I know Marissa, and she spoke to us recently on the estate planning and digital assets and digital footprints. So that's something for another talk that is really valuable. So, saying that,
No, just closing.
I wish to thank our wonderful presenters, all the detail and interesting things that we may not have ever heard before, practical things. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.